then you need to either provide a WSDL URL, a WSDL path, or a zip archive. So in those cases, for SOAP services, we'll already have those WSDL definitions. So for SOAP service, then you make sure you have access to that WSDL, whether it be through the URL, through a path, or through a zip archive. So you can see that you have 4 options when defining a service: through the WSDL, which is the most common for SOAP services, by create a physical service using an existing interface. So you have the interface defined within the policy manager. You create the service from existing schema. So that also would be already existing within the policy manager. So for this create service from schema is generally used for REST services. And then you have the option to actually create a service without a WSDL, in which case you just want to expose that service in the policy manager so that people can search for it. You may to attach metadata to it, so you will have it available in the policy manager. One sec. Okay, we're going to focus now on creating a service from a WSDL because we are going to create a SOAP service. So when you create the service from a WSDL, when you create the service from a WSDL, if you use the URL, so you have to have access to the URL, WSDL URL. You use the WSDL path, that you have the file to the WSDL. You use a zip archive. In general, when you use this option, that means that the WSDL references additional schema and imports that schema into the WSDL. So within the zip archive, you have the WSDL and the referenced schemas. So the 3 options there in terms of rendering the physical service with using WSDL. To create the physical service, you have to provide a physical service name. Again, you need to provide a unique key. This key can be self-generated and entered manually, but it will need to be unique. If you leave it blank, it will be generated automatically. When you register the WSDL, it will pick up the key name, which is a combination of the namespace as well as a local part or service name. It will create this for you and pick out of the WSDL itself. And then you need to select the provider organization. So what organization do you want to register this service in? As you're going through the creation of the physical service, they have the option to manage that physical service. When you manage a service in the policy manager, that means that you can apply policies to that service. You can monitor that service using the monitoring policies, and you can apply quality service or SLA policies to that service within the policy manager. So if you're using Network Director, if you're using Policy Manager for Data Power, or if you're using an embedded agent, all those can be managed through the Policy Manager, in which case you can apply those policies to the services that you're hosting on any of those containers. So to get to this management options screen, you have 3 available management options. You select to not manage the service. That means if you you can't really apply any type of policy to that service. All you're doing is registering it in the policy manager so that it can be searched. You can manage the through an embedded agent, which means that you're managing that through or within a container, which means that you're managing the service through the use of an embedded agent. Or finally, you can manage the service through a virtual service by hosting that on the physical service on a Network Director or Policy Manager for Data Power container. So it's mostly here on managing through a virtual service. We're actually creating the physical service, virtualizing it, and hosting it on a Network Director instance. Now, when you decide to actually the management of that service or to registering the physical service, will show up in the Policy Manager console. And the service will have associated with it by default some workflow. As part of the workflow, we ship with a standard default workflow. And the workflow is just a progression of the steps that a service goes through in its life cycle. This workflow here, does not really impact the runtime of the service. So you could just register the service without even completing the workflow, and you would still be able to invoke that service. The service can be checked for compliance by manually running the compliance check, or you can invoke the compliance checking through the workflow process. So as part of these workflow steps that are initiated in the workflow portlet, one of those steps could be to check for service compliance. Now, to create the physical service, you can see that you have a lot more information here in the middle section of the screen. So you will see the service details overview portlet, which is information about the service itself. You will see a policy attachments portlet where you can attach to that particular service compliance, operational, or QoS policies that service. And you will also see information about ordinal identities or consumers of your service, and as well as metadata. So you can attach metadata to the service, whether it's documentation, whether there are search tags that you want to attach to that service to make it easier to search for. You can add that here in the metadata port. Now, one of the policy types is the compliance policies that are in the Policy Manager. So when a service, you register a physical service, service can be checked for compliance. And a box we ship with a set of 4 types of compliance policies. There's a compliance policy that checks to see if the WSDL is a document style WSDL. There's a compliance check to see if the word has been attached to the service metadata. There's a SOAP action test to see if a SOAP header is actually sent in the request message. And then there's the WSI basic profile alliance check, which is used most frequently to test the service to determine if it complies to the WSI basic profile. And as part of this profile check, it will actually generate a WSI basic profile report as it checks that service. Okay, when you attach compliance policies, whether at the organization level or whether you're at the service level, you will see this policy attachment portlet. You attach compliance policies at either the organization or the service level. And should note that if you do anything you attach at the organization level will be inherited by all those services that are registered within that organization. If you've attached the policy, the compliance policy, you can actually run ART by using this check compliance button here, and it will check all the compliance policies that you have attached to this particular service to whether it adheres to those compliance policies and do a report. So that's steps required to create a physical service. So we're actually going to register a physical service in our organization. And we're registered in our engineering organization because that is our provider organization. We use an account manager service. An account manager services comprise of 5 different operations: list accounts, get balance, withdraw, deposit, and transfer. So we're going to go through the steps of registering the service, and I'm going to give you the actual service URL you need to use to register the service. Okay, so we're all going to go back into the console, the Policy Manager console. Sorry. Right, if I'm gonna, I'll send the URL for the Policy Manager console. And the set we're going to register is the WIS here. Now you may not be able to register this WSDL or see this WSDL by just clicking in your browser, because it is inside of our firewall. But you'll be able to access it from the Policy Manager console. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do when we register a physical service is you have the WSDL URL, is we're going to go to the organization where we're going to register that service. So organization is the engineering organization. So you're going to traverse down the tree to the engineering organization. Up, and going to select your services folder. When you select the services folder, if you look on the right-hand side of the page, there's in the service under the service summary, there's a Create Physical Service link at the bottom at service summary portlet. Right. So you select the Create Physical Service button. You're able to see the screen just like what we saw in the slides. We create the service from a WSDL, right, which we have, and we're going to provide the WSDL URL. Okay, take the WSDL URL they sent in the chat window, and you're going to paste it here. WSDL URL field. Okay, at the bottom right, you'll see there's a next button, and you're going to select the next or click on the next button. So you see that it read the information from the WSDL, the service name, the venue name, and the local part. Now, since all of us are using the same physical service, it's caused a problem. Because in the policy manager, you cannot have a service that has the same key name. Right? Name is what's used to identify each of the services, so it has to be unique. So that's why, as part of the training, each of you given a student number. So append that number to the end of this service name. This will allow everyone to have create a unique service identity. The service name is you're going to put your student number there, and also to the local part. When you go down to the Q name and you see the namespace URI, which is a URL, and you see the local part where it says Account Manager Doc Little Wrap Service, you just append your student number to the end of that local part as well. Both the service name and the local part should have a number after it. Service organization up there in the bottom, you just want to verify that your engineering organization is selected, because we're going to put or want to register this service in the engineering organization, since this is our provider organization. You can click on the next button. Because service is already registered in the policy manager, it's going to ask us, do we want to use an existing binding or import with a new Q name for our bindings? So in order to make everything unique, say we're going to import with a new Q name. So in local part, where it says local part binding, go ahead and put something that is unique. So I usually just say AM, then my student number. So unique, but this can be anything really. And you're going to click on next again, and you see for the interfaces, it sees that there are duplicate interfaces here as well. So just also do the same thing, import with a Q name, a new name, and in local part, you're going to create your unique local part. Then when you're done, you're going to click on the bottom right. You'll click the next button again. Now the management options to the service if we want to manage it through a virtual service. For right now, we're going to keep the default option selected to do not manage. Okay, go ahead and click on the Finish button. Okay, it might be, if you get an error, it's just because there's some contention issues on the database. If you click Finish again, it should work. Full actually connected. So with the Finish button, you should see that there's this dashboard option. So it's going to say keep the default no. So this is, you can create different types of dashboards to monitor your services. So tomorrow we'll actually go through the creation of a dashboard, but today we'll just say no, we do not want to monitor this service. Plus, again, remember, physical services can't really be monitored. They're managed. Okay, go ahead and click on Close. Now, you see under your Engineering Services folder, you should have your physical service. So you'll notice the physical service has a small cog next to it. And look in the Service Overview section. It will actually say that the type of service that you've created is a physical service. See, in the life cycle stage of that service, it says the life cycle stage is in the design phase. Where is it picking up this cycle stage, and where can you change this? It's through this workflow portlet. You actually advance the stages of an actual physical service through its life cycle stages, clicking here on the workflow portlet. See right here, if you look at the workflow portlet, the state of this physical service is in draft mode. If you click on that action submit for approval, the state will be pending approval, and you approve. Submit to development is the action in the workflow portlet. A promote, that's it to development. We see the life cycle stage of this service now say that it is in development. This is a way that you can actually make the life cycle stage of a service through its various different phases. These life cycle stages are actually configurable, so it's not something that is set in stone, but you can configure these as required. The important thing here in the overview portlet is the WSDL URL. So here you can see that you have access to the WSDL URL through the policy manager's REST interface to that service. So every service that gets registered in Policy Manager can use the REST interface to actually access that services through WSDL. So if I open this service up, WSDL for my service, and I see all the operations. Go down here to the actual address location. This should be the physical address location. All right, so again, now if you just look down the screen, you can see all the options that are available for configuration for the physical service. But again, physical services aren't managed by the policy manager, so you're really going to be attaching policies to these services or monitoring the services. What you're going to do is you want to create a virtual service for this physical service that you can actually send requests through managed service, and you can start monitoring that service. So back to the slides, and I will discuss now how to configure virtual services. Okay, we'll mention that after we go through the SOAP service, we'll then go through the registration of Restful service. But I want to go through the the full of the SOAP service, and we'll continue with the rest. Okay, when we configure virtual services now, we first make sure that the physical service is registered. So we already have that requirement met, and we can virtualize it and host it on a network director instance or cluster, or again, you can virtualize a service on policy manager for data power container as well. Virtual services route requests to the physical services, and you apply the policies now to the virtual services. A single instance of the network director or network director cluster can host an unlimited number of virtual services. So we have customers that are hosting hundreds of services, and we do have a customer that's hosting approximately 1,000 virtual services on their network director instances. So the virtual services provide many benefits, which I've talked about already. One is endpoint transparency from the consumer. So if the endpoint moves, the consumer does not have to be notified. The consumer is connecting or sending their request to the virtual service endpoint, right? And that's not moving. The virtual service routes to the physical service endpoint. So you just need to change the physical service endpoint and not need to go through the process of notifying those consumers. So create aggregate virtual services where you have multiple services and operations in a virtual service that are aggregated to multiple services and operations. A physical service that is aggregated to create a single virtual service. So you have a virtual service that in reality points to two back-end physical services, but the consumer doesn't have to know. Virtual service.
With the different operations, so half the operations go to one backend and half of the operations go to another backend, or different physical services?
Yes. Yes. From the consumer's perspective, they're just exposed to a single WSDL. But from the routing perspective, the request gets to the network director. The network director will route it to physical service 1 or physical service 2, depending on the operation that is being invoked.
So a netter is required for that?
Yes. Then you can also make routing decisions based on the message content. So you can route requests based on, say, the content in the payload, where, say, if order is greater than $500,000, you're going to route it to service A, versus if a purchase order is less than $500,000, you're going to route it to service B. You can make routing decisions based on message content if you're using the network director. You can also do XSLT transformation, or do mediation. So JSON, ML to JSON types of mediation. Some of the
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry?
I'll let you finish.
Some of the benefits of the network director, but as you use the network director more and as customers use it more, they have various different use cases. And for the most part, we can cover the majority of the use cases, either through out-of-the-box policies or through custom policies as well.
I have a two questions rather. Okay. So first question is when we want to do a special routing or an XSLT transformation, know what those customers are, so we can create a special virtual service just for them, so that whenever they send the message to that virtual service, we can implement the XSLT transformation or any routing logic for them, so that it does not affect all our other traffic. That would be behind that, correct?
That could be one of the use cases. So, for instance, in the payload, they're sending, a customer ID or partner ID or something in their payload, so you know that it's coming from that customer. You could look for that and that traffic to a specific backend service, versus all the traffic would be sent to, backend service 2. Then one example of an XSLT transformation. An example, and more, I would say, used quite often, is when versioning a service. So you have version 1 of your virtual service, and you are updating that service to version 2. But you still have consumers that are sending in version 1 requests. You do an XSLT transformation so that it adheres to the version 2 service so that it can be routed to the back end.
Okay.
Right, back-end service is updated to version 2, but then there's some consumers that still haven't updated their client application to send in a version 2 request.
Okay.
So XSLT transformation to force it in a version 2 request.
Two more questions just popped up on my mind. Okay. One question is, can we say virtual service? Like, for example, we have a standard rule implemented that SSL 2SL can be implemented either. Vinita, you can correct me, okay? Implemented at the whole service level, so impact all the customers. So is there a way where we can implement an additional virtual service which is specific to that one customer, and then implement an two-way SSL for that customer on that virtual service only?
Well, the SL, talking inbound or outbound to physical
Inbound.
service?
Inbound.
Okay,
Well,
inbound.
I have a physical service, right? And I have a virtual service for that already, right? That's
right, right.
I have, say, 50 customers coming in through that. Now, new customer who wants to do two-way SSL, by there's policy that is set up right now which does not allow us to do two-way SSL just for that one customer, right?
Right.
To get at that, if I create an additional virtual service for that customer, create a virtual service specific to that customer. So on that virtual service, can I add a policy to say, okay, you know what, this will require a two-way SSL in extra
Yes.
509 certificate?
Well, actually, you could set it up so that you could use a single HTTPS listener. So basically, the listener will affect all the services, right? So if you have a HTTPS listener, and if you configure that listener for mutual authentication where it requires that the consumer send in a certificate, then that consumer will need to send in the certificate. You can apply policy then on a particular virtual service where you're actually authenticating that is being used in the SSL handshake.
Okay, I'll give you. I'm not coming clear. So we need to accept HTTP. Okay.
Right.
And it has to be a pass-through service. It's not anything else, but take it in and pass to a machine on the back end. And it's going to be access HTTP. So we have to enable SSL, two-way SSL for that. If I have a physical service just for that one customer, would that be doable?
Yeah, create a virtual service.
Okay, are you there?
So if this is a specific use case, why don't you send me your use case, and we can always take this offline and we can go through it.
Okay, question. So with respect to JMS, so JMS you can only have a queue set up, right, for send and receive. There isn't do any JMS bridge.
No queues.
Just queues. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you send me your use case for anyone who's on the course, if you have on specific use cases that you're trying to set up, if you see those use cases, we can go through them as part of the course, applicable and general enough to go through as part of the course. We can do that. Otherwise, we set up additional WebExes with you, and it'll probably take 15 minutes to go through your specific use case. Okay. So I'll send you, actually right now, I'm going to send you my email in the chat so everyone has it. You get the virtual service provides a lot of advantages for you, and whether you are using virtual services in a cluster or whether you have a single network director and virtualizing the services on the network director, concept is exactly the same. You have a virtual service in a network direct cluster, it gets deployed to every single one of those directors that are part of the cluster. Network, if you have a service on the network director, you then will virtualize it just on that network, host that virtual service on that network director. And you see it doesn't matter, right? You can host whether it's a SOAP service or it could be a restful service. It could be a mediation use case where it's a get in and actually doing a post to a back-end physical service. You can do that type of mediation as well, all as part of a virtual service and the functionality provided in a virtual service. When you create a virtual service, it's very similar to when you create a physical service. Okay, when you create a virtual service, you create it from the registered physical service or existing interface, and you need to provide a name for that service. By default, the policy manager gives it a _VS0 name. You need to provide a service key, and again, if you leave that service key blank, the policy manager will generate a unique key for you. And then you need to select the provider organization where you want to register that virtual service in. Okay, now, depending on how many listeners, right, you have configured for you're able to host that virtual service for all the listeners or just some of the listeners. So here you can see there's a HTTP listener as well as, this is for SOAP 1.1 and 1.2. So you can create whether it's different listeners or whether it's different bindings. You can create multiple and access points depending on how that service is configured. You can see this physical service has two bindings, a SOAP 1.1 and 1.2. So you can create access points to be able to access the SOAP 1.1 as a SOAP 1.2 service. If as a listener, you had multiple listeners, you would be able to see you could host it on either an HTTP or an HTTPS or both listeners. So when you do the virtual service, you need to provide a context path for when it is hosted on the network director instance. So here you can see you have your binding type. You have the listener address. So here's the base listener for network director. And then you have the context path on which you're going to render that virtual service. So take the listener address plus context path, and that is the URL that you're going to expose to the consumer. Okay, so in cases, are going to use for all their services. In some cases, we do have customers where they put services at the root context. Then there has to be something in the request message that can help identify the location and method that you're trying to invoke as part of that service. In this case, the context path is based on actual SOAP request you're sending. All right, so when you create then your virtual service, you see that now the cog associated with this particular virtual service is a bigger cog, meaning it's a virtual service. You're able to see then the virtual service hosted on Work Director. So here to the Network Director, you're actually able to go to the Hosted Services tab and see the services that are hosted on this Network Director. We have the SOAP 1.1 and SOAP 1.2 service. Now, the service, when it gets created, will then to attach various different policies to the service as well if you go to the details page of the virtual service. So our virtual service, which looks very similar to the details page of the physical service, right? So you have policy attachments, you have clients, you have consumers, metadata. Then you have the workflow information, actions that are applicable to this virtual service. Go to the operations tab of a virtual service. You'll to see all the operations for this particular service. If you want to change the routing for a particular operation, in Actions pull down, you'll see one of the options is to actually change the routing and select the endpoint that you want to route the request to. To do this by default, if you're actually virtualizing from a physical service, the routing will automatically be set up. To actually virtualize a service, Network Director will either strip all the HTTP and SOAP headers, or it will preserve the headers. Okay, by default, it's going to actually strip the headers when it sends it to the physical service. It's stripped the SOAP headers. So all U.S. security headers that you send, if you send as part of this request, get terminated at the Network Director. So one Network Director has enforced the policy for the U.S. security headers that are sent in. It'll strip those headers and send them off to the physical, and the request off to the physical service without those headers in there. To preserve all the headers, you have to use and select the option to preserve all the headers. Binding screen, you're able to see the bindings for the service that you've created. You can see the XML bindings here and SOAP 1.1 and 1.2 bindings. So you're able to see all the bindings for the virtual service you created. As the access points. So this is the Net Director information plus the context path that you entered. So in order for a consumer to actually invoke this service, they need to go to this access point. Add categorization schemes to your service to facilitate searching. So you could create your own set of category schemes and add them here and attach them to the virtual service if you wanted to do so. Our you can set up rules. So when you configure a virtual service, you're set up denial of service rules. So you can actually limit access to the virtual service by allowing only a certain IP address range to access a virtual service, to allow certain message sizes or transaction rates. This will ensure that there's no one who's actually trying to configure the service to cache your service configured and exposed. Monitoring sub-tab here for the virtual service is one that we'll be using quite in the hands-on, where you're actually able to see alerts, the logs, the real-time charts, get historical data, and view the dependencies for virtual and physical services in your environment. So this is helpful when actually trying to do a type of troubleshooting or monitoring to see whether there is any traffic that's passing through your network director. This is just how you would create an aggregate service from physical services. So you register your physical services in the policy manager, you create new interfaces for those physical services, you'd create an aggregate from these two interfaces, and create a binding for this particular interface to expose it in the network director as a virtual service. So when the consumer actually to this virtual service, it'll actually go to one of these two back-end physical services. And you create aggregate services, you actually do need to configure routing to the physical service so that the network director knows to send request for operation 1 to this physical service versus operation 5 needs to go to this physical service. So on the virtual service operations sub-tab, you'll to then use this action pull-down to select the manage routing option and select the service that you want to route the request for that particular operation to. Okay. So, yeah.
So it is. We can divide it into. We can divide the operations and send it two different ways. Is it to translate, like if you receive a HTTPS call, right? Backend is an HTTP. Can that be done?
Oh, that has to be done by default. So when actually what you would do, if this is an HTTP service, right, when you register this into the network director will see that this service is HTTP and will send the request HTTP. The listener here, the inbound listener, you require that your consumer will be sent to this virtual service that is hosted on an HTTP listener of the network director, and then the request would go out over HTTP because the network director would see that this physical service is registered as HTTP. There's nothing that you have to do. The only thing you have to do is register that HTTP service.
Okay.
Box nothing, no policy or anything that's required to do that, or anything special.
Okay. Now, one question more, and then if a backend WSDL gets updated, we can do that update within eBroker.
You can. So if you update WSDL, I think that's actually part of the training, but I'll just show you. You need to update the physical service WSDL. You have an option here to in develop when it's in development. I actually can't. The workflow is not allowing me to. The work not allowing me to update the service, but let me see if anyone else is here is not. Oops. So here is in a draft mode, but you can see here that there's this update service option. So when you create a virtual service, you can actually proxy it to this physical service. So if you make a change and you update the model for this physical service, it will automatically get updated for the virtual service. And when you create the virtual service, I'll show you that option.
Okay.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, just to finish that thought up. So yes, you can update a physical service, and those just can get propagated to the virtual service. So now what we're going to do is we're going to virtualize the account manager service. Okay, the weather service we're going to register after this. The weather service is our Restful service, but the account manager service is the one that we already have. So we're going to actually register this account manager service and virtualize it. Okay, I'm going to actually use SOAP UI. So I hope that all of you have SOAP UI or some type of client to allow us to be able to send a request to our account manager service. If you don't have it, then you can watch as I do it. So here, now we're going to virtualize our physical service. In order to virtualize the physical service, you select the physical service, and you'll see Action Portlet. The last option is to virtualize the service. Okay, so you select that virtual service option. By default, you should see that the service name should be your service name _ VS0, and then the local part should be the same. So this should already be unique, so we don't really need to change anything here. And if you change this name is only for display purposes, so you can change it to whatever you want it to be. The provider is going to be your engineering organization, so that should already be selected, but just verify that. And then the next button at the bottom right. And now we need to the organization where we're going to actually host this service. So, the container. Hold on. Sorry. So our container is in the root containers folder. So you get that containers folder, and you select the ND training network director. See why the ND has to be at this level. If I had put it under my organization, none of you would be able to see this container here and host your service there. Select ND training. This network director has two listeners, one for HTTP and one for HTTPS. So if you want, you can host the service on both listeners or on just one. Right? I'll select both of them. You have to give it a port. This port name is going to have to be unique. So we're actually building the WSDL for our virtual service, so we have to give it a port name. So it can be things. So I just said AM30 HTTP and AM30 HTTPS. And we need to enter the context path for our virtual service. Now, because these two services are hosted on a different listener, right, one's on HTTP and one's on HTTPS, the context path can be the same. AM30, I'm going to, and the context path for my HTTP listener will be the same. So if a customer wants to be able to access my virtual service, they have to go to the listener address plus the context path. We'll click here on Finish. Do you want to display it in the dashboard? You can just close this window. Keep the default. Okay. So someone put their service here in my organization, but that's okay. That you know your service is here in my organization, whoever's number 10. So once that came up is, okay, can I update this physical service? So say this physical service, I have to add a new operation, which is one of the main use cases for updating the service. You know, a lot of people will change the interface. If you're going to change or update the physical service, and you want the service to be reflected as well, once you make that change, you have to make sure that the virtual service is proxied to the physical service. So how do I know that it's proxied? If you look on the right-hand side in the Actions portlet, the first option in that Actions portlet for the virtual service is as a proxy. So make sure that that option is selected. Say Act as a proxy, and you click on there. You to select the service that you want to be your proxy service, the physical service. In this case, it should be your physical service, the corresponding physical service to that virtual service. Okay, click Apply. You get a big pop-up message saying that you can't change the interface, and it'll affect the routing information. So you can just say, okay, that's fine. So now you can see in the Actions portlet, you have the option, if you look almost halfway down, that says Do Not Act as Proxy. So if I were to go and update this service, right now I can't because the flow is preventing me from doing this. But I'm going to go to one of your services down here. Or let me just take this one, let's see. Actualize this 10 service I can show you. So make this service act as a proxy to Account Manager Doc Literal Wrap Service 10. Okay, if you look at the operations, so go ahead and click on your virtual service operations sub-tab. You'll see that there are 5 operations here, whether it's for the virtual service or whether it's for the physical service. Right? If you look at the virtual service, so click back on the virtual service operations and pull down actions on just one of the operations. On the actions, there's a manage routing action. Right? If you select that manage routing action, you'll see that the virtual service is routing to the next top service, which should be your physical service. And you could change the routing if you wanted to. Okay, if I wanted to then update this service, I'm just going to do this virtual service so you can watch and see. As long as you have this service to act as a proxy, you can use this Update Service option. Select a path. And select my WSDLs. And here, Account Manager one. Okay, take this, and this one has a new operation in it. So I'm going to WSDL, click Next. And others saying that the interface has changed. And I'm going to interface. I'm going to select binding. Okay, it should show me this completion summary. So I look at this service and go to operations. You can see that now I have a new operation here. Close. When I go to virtual service, I see the same thing, the close. Okay, this is there is actually a bug where when we update the WSDL, it's actually putting the service name in there. Although this will not impact the runtime, but it does impact if you're collecting usage data. So right now you have to go in and change that. So that's how you can use the policy manager to actually manage the updating of your services as well. Understand that piece now? Okay. Now we have our virtual service.
Unmute your line. Press *6 or #6.
Please. We have our virtual service configured, hosted on the network director. The next thing to do is we're going to use SoapUI to actually invoke this virtual service. So a couple methods of retrieving the WSDL for this virtual service. One way is if you click on the details of your virtual service, you can see right here that here's the WSDL when you go to the WSDL URL in the service overview. Here you can actually view the WSDL in this manner. You can do it is by retrieving it from the network director itself. So from the network director, actually go to your context path and WSDL. Okay, but see here that I'm getting a 404 error. The reason is that if you're used to using Service Manager or Policy Manager, then you're used to retrieving the WSDLs from the network director. In 6.0, you use a question mark now. You cannot use the slash anymore to retrieve the WSDLs. In earlier versions of the Policy Manager, you could, but you have to use a question mark to retrieve the WSDL. Everyone should be able to retrieve their WSDL, their virtual service. Okay, to the HTTPS port, listener, ND listener, and entering your context path that you for your virtual service and entering question mark WSDL.
How are you?
To retrieve the WSDL that way. So that's another way that you can actually provide the WSDL to your consumers if you don't want, or if you're not going to give them a file, or if they want to access it directly from the network director. Now, before we actually register the service in SoapUI that I want to show you, that that isn't in the slides right now. The slides in the process of being updated, so some of these things aren't in there yet. One of the ways to be able to tell if the services are actually deployed on the network director is by enabling one of the URLs, the URLs in the network director console. So when the network director starts up, I'm going to show you scene where the network director is running. Network director starts up. The only thing it shows is this right here, that don't have started. But if you have, say, 100 services that you have deployed on your network director, this is to tell you if those services are actually hosted and be consumed on that network director. So to that information and to see if those services are actually available on the network director, you can enable a URL from admin console of the network director. Okay, URL is available here in the network director's admin console. So if I go to the com.soa.transport.jetty servlet category, you'll see that one of the options here is to list the context. By default, this is set to false. To set this to true, what this is allowing you to do is from the network director, you can now go to a URL, which I'm going to send to everyone in the chat window, that show you the context paths are deployed network director. So if I have this URL that I sent in the chat window, and I actually used that URL, you can see here, these are the contacts that are available for consumption here on the network, on this particular network director. Okay, so we have hundreds of services. This can be very helpful to make sure that all the services are deployed. Okay, that I know my service is deployed, I know I can access it. So I can actually register this service in SOAP UI. So SOAP UI on system, go and launch SOAP UI. Register this service in SOAP UI by using the WSDL. So I'm going to create a new project. You can create a new project, and then you can enter the WSDL for your service. So either take the WSDL right from the policy manager itself, from here, take it from network director by going to network director host, network director IP, the network director port, and then your context path WSDL. Enter this here in SOAP UI, and it then create all the options for me. So now, if I try to invoke the service, so because I hosted my service on both HTTP and HTTPS, you can see here in SOAP UI that there's both an HTTP and an HTTPS address, or you can use either of those. So over HTTP, if you're going to send over HTTP, you have to have access to port 9905. If you use HTTPS, you'll probably be able to access the service because it's running on 443, which is a standard port. Okay, I sent over the HTTPS listener, since that was one of the use cases that someone brought up about sending in over HTTPS, where the physical service was on HTTP. When you submitted that request, you should have an authorization failure. Did I get that far? Up on everyone here. Okay. So if you're in and you're having problems, let me know. Otherwise, I don't really see anyone else trying but myself. So I will continue. You see here, when I try to request, right, the authorization failure. So we get the authorization failure. And look, if you see, right, when I went into the policy manager, I can see, because I'm sending to the virtual service, now I'm able to see and monitor the request going through. So now, as administrator of this environment, I'm saying, oh, okay, someone's trying to send to my virtual service. Right here to my virtual service, and if you want this, if you want to use my virtual service so you can look at the real-time traffic going through, you can go ahead and under the Cherryl org, you can select the virtual service 30 here. To select then the monitoring sub-tab for the virtual service, you can see that because I'm using a virtual service now and have this virtual service configured, now I'm able to do monitoring. I set up any type of monitoring policy. I set up any monitoring on this virtual service. But the fact that I created this virtual service and hosted on the network director means that it's under management by the policy manager. So that's why I'm able to now get all this alerting information. I should see in here in the real-time charts, I see some actual faults come through. So if I send another request, I'm able to see on a real-time basis the actual errors coming through because I'm trying to invoke the service but don't have permission to. Why is it that I can't invoke this virtual service? The reason is because whenever you have a managed service and you want to actually send a request to that service, you cannot send to that service without a contract in place. Okay, so I need to set up a contract to say that, okay, anyone who wants to invoke this virtual service can invoke the service. We're going to talk a lot about contracts, but for now, we'll just set up what's called an anonymous contract that just allows anyone to be able to invoke the service so you can see the request go through. So I am going to create an anonymous contract. So if you go here to the details tab of your virtual service, you'll see you have the option to offer a contract. So as a service provider, you offer a contract. As a consumer of a service, you request a contract. So I'm going to offer the contract. Here you can enter anything in for the contract name. I'm going to call it an anonymous contract, right? And this means that anyone can actually access my service. And then you can set up an expiration date if you'd like. And you're going to select the option, an anonymous contract. You're going to select the second option that says allow consumer or application users that do have a contract explicitly assigned to be able to access my service. Okay, now I can see here that this is EMT, so I'm actually going to select so I'm going to enter my contact information. Contract, right, you need to select the provider organization. You also would need to select the consumer organization if it was not an anonymous contract. If you weren't allowing everyone to access your service, then you would have to select a consumer organization. In this case, we're allowing anyone to access our service, so we don't need to create or select a consumer organization. Okay, I go here under engineering. You can see provided contracts. I have my anonymous contract. If you'll notice, this contract by default gets created in a draft state. The contracts are also under workflow management. So in order to actually enforce this contract, you have to activate it, because even in a draft state, if I still try and send a request, I'm going to get authorization failure as well. So now I'm going to activate this contract. Now, if you look here at the contract scope, you'll see that your service is there with all the operations. And the contract has been activated. Okay, the state is activated. So now it could take up to 2 minutes for the contract to refresh, but I should be able to send another request. And now you can see that I get a response back. So look then, if I go back to my virtual service, I click here on the monitoring sub-tab of the virtual service, the real-time chart. Now you'll see that there's a successful request that did go through. The reason is because now I have this contract in place. In order to actually send a request through a virtual service, you have to have a contract in place that has been activated. So a managed service, remember, is a service that is hosted on one of our containers, on an SOA container. It has a contract in place. Once have met those requirements, they're able to send requests to that service through virtual service. Okay, questions on that? So we created a physical service. We create a virtual service. I showed you how you can update the virtual service, right, by make sure that the physical service is proxy to the virtual service. And we were able to send a request through the virtual service only after we created a anonymous contract that any consumer to be able to actually send a request to our virtual service. Okay, any questions? You can send it through the chat window as well. Okay. So, everyone's been muted, so if you do have questions and you're speaking it to no one, then you unmute your phone by hitting I think it's the star 6. All right, so why don't we take a break right now until, say, 5 after the hour, and we'll finish up for the day. So when we come back, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to register our REST service and virtualize that so you can see how that is done. Let's take a break for minutes. Be right back. I'm just going to mute my phone and that's it. I'll stay on the line. Okay, everyone back? Okay, let's continue then. So we see how we register a SOAP service. So now let's look at how to register a Restful service. Okay, go here to the training slides. The weather service that we're going to use actually is a static service right now, so it's going to always return static content. But I'm going to show you how you can make that variable so that when you're connecting to a real service that returns data, you can your RESTful service depend various different parameters, either in the URL or as a query string. When we create a REST service, it's really very similar to creating a SOAP-based service. I have to go here to the slides. Sorry, I have to, okay. Okay, so through the steps required to register a REST service, because it's a little different, because a REST service generally does not have a WSDL. And because the policy manager is very WSDL-centric, and we're actually trying to create a WSDL for our RESTful service. So, to register your RESTful service, you either have a schema already defined, or you can define the existing schema in the policy manager and actually define your REST service based on this standard schema. One of the two options to actually create the RESTful service. If you have a schema already, you want to make sure that that schema is loaded into the policy manager before you define your service. So just like when we created our service, the first thing you have to do is you have to start out and create a physical service. Once you create the physical service, then you can virtualize it. But as part of defining the RESTful service, you need to define your operations. You need to define binding types. you need to define all your input, output, and fault message types for each operation. And so you have a little more to you actually define your RESTful service. So when going through the creation of the RESTful service and we're defining our physical RESTful service, then we need to first namespace and service name for our RESTful service. We do either select the option to create the schema from the existing schema, or use existing schema that's in Policy Manager itself. Then add our operations. So you have to have some knowledge of the back-end implementation for that RESTful service. You know, in terms of what operations are available or methods are available to call and how those methods are actually called in order to define the service. So then you need to define the input, output, and fault message types for each of these options. Okay, the input, the output, and then there'll be a fault. So these can be any type, which is the default. We select any type that we're in the input, output, and fault. Then you have all these options to select. And you have your binding details. And really is the most important as far as the actual runtime. So again, you're still defining your physical service, but how you define your physical service will impact your virtual service. So here, for operation, you're going to select a method. Is it a get? Is it a post? Is it a delete? Just define the method. And then you need to define the URI syntax. So here, in this, the URI can actually contain variable parameters or be fixed or a combination of both. You could say, okay, slash, and it could be tree code like /USA / and then zip code in these curly braces, be the actual variable part of the URI. You, again, this is going to be based on what the back-end system is expecting. So you have to know something about the service that you're going to when you define these RESTful services. Serialization. The serialization type here is the content type that you're expecting for input serialization that you're expecting the consumer to be sending in. So if it is a GET, in most cases they're going to be sending in application form URL encoded content type. You can also, so there's a bunch of content types you can select, and the option of also selecting any content type, which just like pass whatever comes through. Okay, the output serialization type is what content type are you expecting the ND or the network director to return to the consumer? So in this case, you select any or select JSON or XML or some type of content that you're going to be returning to the consumer. Now, this here can affect mediation. For instance, if your back-end service is actually returning XML and you want this here to be turned to the consumer as JSON, you can actually select applications/JSON. The content being returned to the consumer will be returned as JSON payload back to the consumer, even though the physical service is returning XML for default serialization. So these input types are very important for the actual runtime, the runtime processing of the RESTful service. So you define your physical service, and then you check the service, you then virtualize that service, and when you get to the management options for your physical service, you can manage it through a virtual service, and you set it to act as a proxy service. So any change that you make to the physical service will get updated on the virtual service. Now, what's the physical service? So here you can see I've defined my physical service and I defined my virtual service. But when you define the RESTful service, the full endpoint isn't yet defined. You have to go into the actual physical service, and you need to add the access point. So you would add the access point to the physical RESTful service. Once the RESTful service is defined, there's actually a WSDL that gets created for that service. Once you have that service virtualized, then you can monitor that service. You can attach policies to that service. So say you want to authenticate your users. You can do all the mediation and provide all the functionality that you get through the network director through that virtual service. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to register a weather service. The weather service returns XML content. Okay, weather service I'm going to just show you from the browser.
One question, Cherryl.
Yes.
So the SOAP-based services, can they be exposed out as REST natively by SOAP?
Yes, you can actually do that type of mediation as well.
Show that sometimes be good.
Okay, so we'll register this RESTful service, and then we'll expose our account manager service on the front end as a service, so you could use a browser. Yet. So we'll do this with this registration. So basically, there's a Restful service at this location, and I need to provide a zip code. Let's say a query string. And it'll be F for Fahrenheit. Okay, this is the URL that allows me to return content from the Restful service. Now again, this is just static, returned, but it still simulates if there were variable content that was being returned. Okay, so the variable is going to be the zip code, and then the query string will be that you could actually display either in Fahrenheit or in Celsius. So given this string, and this is how we need to invoke the service, we have to create our Restful service to invoke this service. So the first thing we're going to do, go into the Policy Manager console, and we'll go to our Services folder, and we're going to create a physical service again. So if you go to the right-hand side and you click on the Create Physical Service link, you're going to create a physical service. But this time, if you look in the Create Service Creation option, we're not going to use the option to create the service from a WSDL. We'll use the option, the second from the bottom, Create Service from Schema. And next. To give our service name, a name. So that's any name. And we're going to keep the service key blank and then let a policy manager generate the key. And we need a queue name here. So the name in namespace UI, it has to be some. So HTTP : something. And then in the local part, it also needs to be usually the name of your service. So you can see the binding type here is HTTP. And click Next. Okay, the schema import option, we're going to use existing schemas. If you had a schema that you wanted to import, you could actually import it here. Use existing schemas. Click Next. Is where we're going to add our operation. So operation is to get weather. So we want to get the weather. So this act on the runtime. This operation that you enter here, this name, is really applicable only for the collection of usage data. So when requests go through and you're collecting usage data, if you know the operation, it'll show this name here. So it's more reporting purposes. I'm going to click Next. And here you need to define the operation messages. So input, output, and serialization, what I use is any type because I don't really care what gets put, output, and fault. So I'm going to select any type here from the schemas, and move over to the input, and then thing for the output. Okay, and once you've defined that, for every single operation you have to go through these steps. So once you've defined this, then you can click on Next. So this is where we want to enter the URI syntax. So if you look at the chat window, right, that I sent, the variable part will be zip code, right? So URI, the actual RESTful service, physical service, resides at everything to the point at which you're at before the zip code. So for the URI syntax for this particular operation, it's going to be zip code brace, right? Because the fifth part of the URL is actually the physical service and everything up to /local. Okay, so operation is really getting the zip code and the temperature. Now you see here that I'm not going to enter the query parameter, the question mark temperature equals Fahrenheit. Right? Query string does not have to be included as part of the URI. But it's the content type. So what content type that I'm expecting? So I'm going to just select, this is a GET, so it's going to be application URL form input. And just this here, the output, so the return type, JSON. So remember, the content that's actually being returned from that particular service is actually XML. So when it gets to the consumer, the ND will convert that XML to JSON. And the serialization that to text XML, usually the case. Or if you could be JSON, it could be the same thing. Okay, so then I've selected my content types. Next, now, so I've defined my physical service. The next thing I want to do is I want to virtualize this service on the network director. So I'm going to manage through a virtual service, and I'm going to keep this option to act as a proxy. So if I make any changes to the physical service, it gets updated on the virtual service. Okay, to the actual action that we used on the SOAP service in Actions portlet to act or do act as a proxy. Next, okay, this gives me my virtual service name, and it creates a key name that is unique. Click next, and then I need to select my container. So I'm going to select my network director container. Again, I can select the listener that I want to send the request on. So use HTTP. Oh no, I'll set it up for both. I define the port, and this is a URL that I need to use to access to get my weather service. HTTP. On HTTPS. you will be able to access this if you want to. So my Restful service. Remember, the last thing I have to do if I here at my Restful service is to define an access point, right? There's no access point defined for this physical service. So I need to define where this physical service actually resides. Okay, so port name, and then I have to give it the location. So the location is the location. Click here on finish. So I have my virtual service configured. I have my physical service configured. So should I be able to send a request to it? Right? If I send a request, what will happen? It would fail. Okay, so here, this browser. Okay, this is the root virtual service. In order to be able to send to my physical service, I have to enter in the virtual service context path and then my zip code. The string. If I do this, all right, see here that got a failure. So I got the failure. Don't have a contract enabled. Be able to, just like I saw for the SOAP service, I should be able to see here the same, should be able to see an alert. Use not authorized to invoke the operation. I can actually create a new contract for this service. And create this contract. I'll say it as anonymous. I provider organization, which is my engineering organization, and click finish. Okay, and the contract is in draft state. Make sure that we add contract. my REST service with the gather operation, I should be able to now send a request and get the weather back. It could take like 2 minutes. Let me try it here. Could be caching. Okay, still getting connection failure. Add it. Oh no, that's so we'll just check to make sure that everything is okay with the contract. So I should be able to send. Okay, so let's check here. I don't know why. So it's not actually reading this, able to see this contract.
Do you need to grant user access?
No, I don't need to. Let me deactivate this one here. That's weird. Okay, hold on. I'm going to just deactivate this, and I'm going to create a global contract here. I have to look and see what's going on. I had a problem with this similar a couple days ago. Oh. I thought I created a different kind of contract. Oh, actually, I know what the problem is. See, the time zone, the time to LA time, but it's, so I have to make it 11. Okay. It should actually, Now it's cached in the ND cache. So let me just restart this. Or just restart the ND. As much as possible gets cached in the network director so that if you have a problem that you don't have to actually keep going to the policy manager to get the information. So the contract, because I sent a request to that particular operation for that particular service, that contract was in cache, and therefore when I try, even though I changed it, it's in the cache. Contract was still in the cache, and that's why I couldn't send. So now I should be able to send. Okay, here's the response that's back, and note that this is coming back in JSON as a JSON payload, where actual physical service turns XML. So the work director actually did that conversion, right? And did the mediation from XML to JSON. And the way was able to do that was through an output serialization. So I look here at this virtual service and open this. So you can see the fault serialization is XML. So when it came back, right, when I got the authorization error, it came back as XML, right? Input serialization was form URL encoded. The location, this means append to the URL, so the base URL being this, variable of zip code, and I'm going to use as a get. And output serialization is application JSON. So I will return to consumer application JSON. So if I sent in a post instead of a get, right? Same URL and sent in a post. What happened? Here to the same URL and I send in a post. Now what will happen? I will get back a 4 error returned because the network director is going to match the content and the information that is sent here with what is defined in that WSDL. Because it cannot find a match, method type just returns a 404. Okay, so very simple RESTful use case, but you can configure them to be more complex. And a lot of RESTful services have more than one operation, so you can use multiple operations for those RESTful services. Now, if you were using Policy Manager 6.0, if you're in 6.0, there was no way to actually modify the RESTful service. You actually export the WSDL, you had to modify the WSDL, and you had to update the WSDL. In 6.1 of Policy Manager, which is running, you usually update the service, and you can update your RESTful service. to add a new operation, I could do that operation here, or if needed to change any of the content type. So if I wanted to change the default content type so it returns JSON, I could do it from here. Having to go back and doing all mind the WSDL, you just use the wizard to do that. And if I look at WSDL, this updated source, I see that the default serialization has been changed to application JSON. Okay, just like with the SOAP service, if you set that service to be a proxy to the virtual service, then any changes that you make on the physical service will get updated in the virtual service. That's very important to know the difference. Any questions on this piece?
One, how would you find that this service is going to the same, is referring to the SOAP WSDL, to the SOAP service? Is a situation like that or no?
You want to expose this service as a RESTful service, you actually have to add an HTTP binding to this SOAP service. So if we look at this SOAP service, right, it had these operations. What I have to do is I have to add binding to a virtual service. So here I can, oh wait. Actually, I have to change this to not act as a proxy. So I have this SOAP service and I want to expose a RESTful interface for this service. So what I have to do is I have to add a new HTTP binding. Okay, sorry. I kind of forgot the steps, so I'm add a binding. I'm going to go here to my account. Sure. Oh, I thought I could. All right, find my account manager. Okay, select my interface. So I'm going to add a REST, right, an HTTP binding. When I do that, right, it's going to give me all the operations. So here's list accounts. So you can define how you want this list accounts to come back. So let's just say JSON, since that's like a lot of people like seeing the JSON. to do this for every single one of your operations. Deposit. Okay, so now I have this new interface, and assign this to my service. So here, did you see right here when I go to interfaces and bindings? Now see if I have this as act as a proxy, I can manage this interface and bindings here. So in order for me to add a new binding, I need to change this to not act as a proxy. Right, I'm able to manage interfaces and bindings. So I should be able to able to now see my HTTP binding here that I did. So we have an HTTP binding, but I do need to add, I think I added an access point. Oh no, maybe not. Look here at the wisdom. Here in the WSDO, right, it added my HTTP binding. So now I could do a get on AM30 list/list accounts, and it should return information for list accounts. So here to list accounts, right, sending to the SOAP service. Oops. Sorry, I activated that contract. Send to the SOAP service. There's definite problems here with this release and contracts. Because when I activated this, now it's in T. So let's put this to the current time. So here I went with the soap service, and I received the soap content back. So now, because I have the HTTP binding in there, I send using HTTP or using my browser. So I have to go here, AM30, list accounts. All right, let me just look at this. Okay, this one should work. I don't really know what's happening. I'll have to look and see what's happening, because that one should actually be a problem. But I'll get this configured and I'll show you tomorrow, and I'll let you know what happened. I don't know why it's not able to actually get the information for the list accounts. So I think we're actually right at the time where we finish up for the day. It's a good point at which to finish up. So are there any questions right now?
I have one question. Like in the previous version that we're using now, we assign the policies when we create the service. Is it like done as a separate step now and will be covered in tomorrow's session?
Yeah, I haven't really gone through any policy attachment, but yeah, it's exactly the same. So we'll go through that tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, other questions? If you have any questions as you go through the day or you want to cover tomorrow, you can just send me an email, and then I'll get this piece of it working, and tomorrow we'll start covering the operational policies, SLA policies, and the contracts as well. More on contracts. Yes?
Ziva, I had a question, but I'm just having a problem with the URL, so it's specific to what I'm doing. After everyone hangs up, I can ask you.
Sure, problem. So, is there questions? Okay, I hope.
Yeah. Maybe you're done with the call. Maybe we can discuss with Vinita for the SSL question that I had earlier in the morning.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So